Chapter 3. He brought me forth. He brought me forth also into a large place. 2 Samuel 22:20. Jubilant, Mike bounded home from the meeting with the county commissioners, fully believing that even though we did not have a lease, they had given their permission for us to move out to King's Garden and begin cleaning up. Not having a lease did not faze him at all, for he felt this was only another testing of his faith. He was willing to step out on the promise of God that he would give the city. Of course, if the county should lease the place to someone else, we would lose all the money invested, and also the labor of cleaning and renovating. Because there were still 2 weeks before we had to move out of our home, we decided to wait there as long as possible and use our home as a base for operations. During that time, Mike drove out to the property in the mornings and returned home in the evenings to sleep. I stayed at home to do the office work and get our packing done. A young couple who had indicated a desire to help us moved out first to King's Garden to guard the place and begin to get things somewhat cleaned for other workers who would be coming in soon. One of the first gifts we received was 500 chickens. This was a very welcome one because they supplied eggs for our growing food demands. By the time our family moved out to King's Garden on August 15th, there was a small colony of families living there and working with all their might, genuinely sacrificing their means of livelihood to move there. These families trusted the Lord for all their needs. We could only promise them their room and board and a small allowance as the Lord provided for it. It was a remarkable blessing to both Mike and me to see their willingness to commit to this ministry under those circumstances. The day we moved out there, the Lord gave Mike the song, "I Have Decided to Follow Jesus," and he was singing robustly as we drove along. This song continued to be his dedication song and has often been sung by the workers. At first, the only means of cooking for everyone was one hot plate, and the only hot water available on the premises was in the store building at the other end. This necessitated carrying buckets of water for about a block. But the team had a great attitude as we all took turns hauling the water to the dining room where we all ate together. When people saw that we had actually moved to the King's Garden and were working there, volunteers came in droves to help with the gigantic task of cleaning. We had been told that since this had been a tuberculosis sanatorium, it would be best if all the walls were washed with soap and water. As a result, one of the great needs was rags. We asked those who came to wash to bring all the rags they could, but soon these were all used up. Rags cost $6 a bale in those days, and we did not feel we could take our few precious funds and purchase any. So we held a prayer meeting, and the next day one of our workers was walking in the tunnels. There were small rooms off these tunnels, and he glanced into one as he walked by. His eyes fell on 6 bales of rags, clean and ready to be used. He came running to Mike about his find. Together they praised the Lord for this provision. The main kitchen sat as a disaster area. Hair-like fungus, 2 to 3 inches in length, had taken over the walls, and when the door opened, the fungus would billow in the breeze. The men scraped the walls with a garden hoe until they were able to scrub them clean. Next up was the kitchen range, which had about 1/2 inch of scum on the top of it. An electric buffer was used to remove this, and it took 3 days to get down to the metal. Finally, after 10 days, the kitchen sparkled, and there was great rejoicing when the stove and ovens were ready to be used. Preparing the team's food in a functional kitchen was so much easier. Among the earliest workers was an elderly retired baker and his wife, and the long, luscious loaves of bread which he baked in great quantity were unforgettable. Whenever we had guests visiting King's Garden, many exclaimed over the delicious bread. Next, attention was turned to the water supply, and the water department was asked to turn on the water in the main buildings. With this execution, we unfortunately discovered that Furland had forgotten to turn off the water when they moved, so the water, instead of coming out through faucets, came out from the walls and the places where the pipes were broken. All our team could do was turn on the water and station men with pipe wrenches and axes in various places. As the breaks were found, these men would chop into the walls and repair the pipe. It took a number of days of this kind of work to get the water coming through the pipes correctly. Often when water spurted from the wall, some of the women washing the walls would get a soaking. Most of the tile on the floors had buckled, and it was necessary to pry it all off and lay new tile. These presented great tasks for such a small crew of men workers, but they all worked tremendously hard, and hours were forgotten in their eagerness to see the work accomplished. Many of the buildings felt damp and cold because the heat had not yet been turned on, but that fall happened to be a warm one. The sun blessed us as it shone brightly practically every day, making the work much easier. When people would comment on the beautiful fall weather, we would answer that God had specifically given us such nice weather because there was no heat in the buildings. With so much pride in what we were accomplishing at King's Garden, we wanted to share our joy with other people. We decided to hold a rally on the lawn on the last Sunday afternoon of August and invited people to visit and take tours of the buildings and grounds. A great crowd arrived on that beautiful warm day. The Salvation Army band played several numbers, and then Mike gave a short talk about what we desired to accomplish through King's Garden. One of the county commissioners came, and when he heard we were living there, he became quite alarmed. He told Mike the county had not intended for us to move out to Furland, and it would be tragic if the place should now be leased to someone else. Still unfazed, Mike only continued to witness to him and to all others that God was going to perform the miracle and that Old Furland was going to be leased to us. Since we were banking on God's promise, we had so much peace in our hearts that we did not feel there was any risk. Finally, as the colder weather approached, we decided the boilers needed to be turned on. One of our first workers told Mike he could operate boilers, but that he did not understand how to get them ready for operation and would need some help. So the two of them prayed together, and George prayed these unique words: "Lord, send us a man to start the boilers, one who is well experienced, an older man, one sort of fat and jolly." Mike pondered over George's unusual prayer. One Saturday evening, not long after this, Mike and I went to Youth for Christ. After the service, a man asked us, "Do you need an engineer out at your place?" He was an older man, heavy-set and happy-looking. We could see he fit the description of the man George had prayed for. He moved to the garden, and indeed he knew how to fix boilers. In only a short time, the boilers were ready for operation. We had been told many times that it would cost $1,500 to put boilers into operation, and we knew that our small bank balance would not permit any such expenditure. Again, God proved himself so faithful to our prayers. With the boilers in use, the engineer asked Mike how we would buy the oil for their operation, quoting a high estimate of the cost. Mike explained that the money at hand was so little that he didn't feel it wise to use it all for oil. They prayed together and asked the Lord what to do. Some days later, as one of the men was cleaning behind the powerhouse, he found an oil tank which no one knew was there. He came in and got a stick to measure the oil. He found there were 6,000 gallons in the tank. People would ask, was the oil there before? Mike always answered he did not know, but he liked to think it was the same as the cruse of oil in 1 Kings 17 that never ran dry for Elijah and the widow of Zarephath. When the time came for starting up the boilers, the only cost was for some wood to start the fire burning. The time to celebrate was not yet, however, because no sooner were the boilers turned on than an unexpected catastrophe happened. A large thermostatic valve split down the middle because it had not been used for so long. Again, the boilers were shut down, and again, the men prayed. The engineer inquired over the phone about the cost of a valve, and he was told not only was there none available in the Northwest, requiring one to be shipped from the East, but also the price would be between $300 and $400, a value of approximately $4,300 today. The men were rather downcast over this news. Aimlessly, one began to rummage around under the benches, finding a valve just like the one which was broken, brand new, and still packaged. Finally, the time to celebrate had come. Another crucial, outstanding need was a means of communication between the buildings. Furland had left an intercommunication system, but by this time it proved broken and unusable. The strain this put on our team was great because we were few in number and the buildings were large and covered quite an area. When a person was needed, someone was sent running to find them, exhausting themselves in the long process. In case of emergency, the stakes were even higher. We gathered in prayer and asked God to send someone to fix the intercommunication system. 2 weeks later, a man contacted Mike and asked if we needed some electricians to help us prepare the garden for full operation. He said some men were working in the Navy Yard in Bremerton who were eager to be a part of what we were doing. When Mike relayed our need, this man brought 5 or 6 engineers on a Friday evening after their work at the yard. They worked all night Friday, all day Saturday, and then they returned home. On the following weekend, they came again, and on the 3rd weekend, they completed the work so that the system could be used. What a blessing and time saver. These electricians continued to help when they could and proceeded to work on the entire electrical system. One day, Mike was walking on the avenue and saw an electrician searching for a short circuit in the wiring for the lamp posts. The man told Mike he had been hunting for this short for several hours. Mike said, "I know how to find it." Greatly amazed, the man asked, "How?" Mike told him they should pray and the Lord would help find it. So the two of them bowed their heads and asked God to reveal to the electrician where the short was so that it could be speedily repaired. Mike walked on and later came back over the same path. As he neared the workman, the man shouted, "It works, Mike! Prayer works! We found the short!" One of Mike's favorite sayings was, "Prayer is the greatest time saver of all." One way in which God provided for us that was extra special was He gave our workers an authentic love for one another. We were just as a big family, and when anything happened, it affected us all. One day, a little girl belonging to a worker's family was lost. We looked and shouted, but no little girl. Finally, one of the men said he thought he remembered seeing her and that she had purple stains on her lips. We became very alarmed because when the staff of Old Furland had moved, many things were left behind, including medicine and various chemicals, and we still had not had the opportunity to clean them all out. We gathered together at the front of the administration building and pleaded with the Lord to help us find the child. Finally, the mother returned to their living quarters and found her daughter asleep in her own bed. Her lips did have a purple stain on them, but evidently she had not swallowed anything harmful. We were so dependent on the Lord in those early days, and He provided at every turn. A few contributions were coming in, enough to supply our food and other necessary expenses, but we continued to have needs that our limited funds could not supply. It was very interesting to see the many different ways God used to meet our needs. One of these was a truck. One day, a man phoned Mike and told him that he was buying a new truck and that instead of turning in the old truck on the new one, he would like to offer it to King's Garden. He hesitated to give it because it did not have a truck bed. However, Mike assured him we had great need for a truck and we would get along with its use even though it did not have a bed. When the truck was delivered, the men remembered a truck bed near the farm buildings. When they checked, they found it was the exact size to fit on the truck. One last unexpected blessing the Lord provided, one we did not even think to ask for, was when a producer visited us and offered to make a film showing the story of how the King's Garden came to be. Throughout these weeks of hard work and preparation throughout the property, this man would pop in with his camera and capture scenes of us all. When it was completed, we were able to use this film to communicate the vision of King's Garden. And this was more beneficial than we could have known. Day after day, week after week, the Lord gave us His grace and His provision so miraculously. Our team felt so much gratitude to be part of something that so clearly God's hand was orchestrating.